This is Deborah Johnson for Women at Halftime, and I'm passionate about helping women use their untapped skills, resources, and talents to create their ideal work and lifestyle, making a difference in their second half. Well, I am so glad to be back with you today. This is great to have our guest with you. I'm so excited to have Thom Singer. I've known Thom for actually, not forever, but a number of years. It's great to have you here, Thom. So thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
Such fun. We have a great topic ahead for you. So a couple announcements first. Learn Music Again is still, the card is open right now. If you want to play again, this is the time. And it's really for those who used to play that want to play again. And I've heard it a number of years. People say, oh, I'd love to get back to my piano. Oh, but do they? No. So this is a way. And I'm putting up challenges now. I'm feeling people need to have a running start to even get started. So that's why those are on there. You can always look up learnmusicagain.com. And remember, it keeps the mind sharp and it lowers stress. So let's get into our subject, though. I'm so excited to have Thom here because you have so much experience and you're just a fun guy, Thom. You're just fun. But we're going to talk about the result-driven versus the project-driven entrepreneur. And you had a complete full podcast just on entrepreneurs, cool things entrepreneurs do. And now it's called Making Waves at Sea Level. And I want to ask you, first of all, plus I'll give a little bit of your background. I mean, you've been a professional speaker now for, 10 years, but you're now hosting a couple podcasts. You're a guest at many of them, and you've got your CSP. You can explain that. But what do you think of when you think of results-driven versus project-driven for entrepreneurs? And how's that different?
It's such an interesting topic because, if you interviewed three people, you could have three different answers to this question. So my thought on it is that I am really results driven. I'm not an attention to detail guy. You can ask my wife, or I host a video show called The Webinar Talk Show that I do with Eliz Green, and she is super attention to detail. And we were talking to a potential client to MC their event together, and something came up about detail. They asked about detail, and I said, "Oh, that's Eliz," and she laughed. And later, I'm like, "Oh, I'm not going to pretend that I'm the detail guy." So at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of paths you can do to get there. There's a lot of things you can do, but you can also get lost in the planning. You can get lost in the weeds. So many people like to do the execution and never make any money. So right. I care about the results, and I want to see, where do I get to the other side? And I'm a person, for better or worse, I throw a lot of spaghetti against the wall and I see what sticks. And you know what? It's okay that some of that hits the floor, as long as some of it sticks and I can go out and create on that. And that's what I've had to do the last year since COVID hit. Yes. Is, I went from a career that was one thing to a career that's now 4 different things, so that I can pay the mortgage and pay the tuition at Dartmouth for my college student. And so the combination is, if I can accomplish the results to cover my expenses, I don't care how I get there.
Right. And we're going to talk about that too. Multiple streams of income, how important that is, and your intellectual property. I love that. I do think people get I'm all for planning, and details are very important for that. But also you've got to execute it and really see what's working and what's not working.
Yeah. Process and systems are super important.
Yes, they are.
But you can have processes and systems and go broke. Yes. I'd rather be a little fly by the seat of my pants and make a lot of money.
Yes, exactly. I think we all would.
Both would be better, to have process and systems and make a lot of money. But if I had to pick one, I'd take the financial success.
Yeah, yes. And the success and survival for some. I mean, absolute survival.
And not all of us are detail oriented, right? I'm married to somebody who is very detail oriented, and that's awesome. Yes. But it's also not me. If we both were that way, we'd probably go crazy around this house.
Yeah, you drive each other nuts.
This way, I drive her nuts.
Yes.
And, it works out. Only one of us has to go crazy.
Yeah, well, that's why you've survived in your marriage and you've worked along. Greg and I have done the same thing. So, and you focus quite a bit then also in your business on relationships. So, and they lead to better opportunities and more sales. So we're talking about results. Okay. So this is one of those ways. So how are you developing those relationships, and what words of advice do you have for entrepreneurs or small businesses looking to grow, especially as so many are still isolated?
Sure. Well, I mean, if we go back to pre-COVID, if we go way back 20 years, I had a career in sales and marketing, and I had a very successful career. I got a lot of opportunities. I got hired away to better jobs. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I treated people really well. I was super good at making referrals when I saw that other people could benefit from knowing each other, or whether it was a referral or just an introduction, because I knew two great souls together as friends would be a good thing. That when I was in need, in fact, I got laid off one time because the company I worked for went out of business. It wasn't my fault. I didn't get fired, but I had a company in town literally create a job for me. They didn't have the position. And they said, look, we'll create a job for you 20 hours a week until you find a job. Wow. And I said, why would you do that? And they said, you've just been very good to us. And this was a big national company. And the local manager said, I went to my boss and said, look, we have generated a lot of money because of doors he's opened for us. Mm-hmm. So they created a marketing job for me. Now, I never took it because I got a job within 3 weeks of being laid off. So it didn't matter. But I always remember the gentleman who did that and said, look, you've helped me along the way. I'm going to create this part-time position for you for up to 6 months while you look for a job. And I never took it, but it was like, wow. And I suddenly realized that when you do the relationship game right, people will move mountains for you. But in order to get there, you have to be a person who's willing to do that for them. So fast forward to today, I still am actively trying to build and maintain relationships. And what I'm teaching companies who are hiring me to come in via Zoom or another platform to do virtual training is I call it social tightening while social distancing. So for the last year, we've heard so much about for the safety of all of us. And I agree, we need to be cautious. This disease is a dangerous thing. And so we have to be careful. We have to be cautious. Distancing is one way to keep people safe. But the problem is that relationships, our social lives are, whether it's business or personal, it's like muscles. Yes. You don't go to the gym and work out, they're going to atrophy. There's actually surveys that have been done where they've looked at people who spent time on the space station, in solitary confinement in a prison, or in Antarctica or some other thing. They come back after a long time. They're a little bit socially awkward. They have to relearn how to engage. And so I've been teaching people since last March that if you're not working on this, you're going to fall behind. And so what I tell companies is I ask people, who's doing a better job during the pandemic, you or your competitor, at keeping and making relationships with clients and prospects? And then I remind them, remember, your clients are your competitors' prospects.
Okay, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. And they usually say, well, I don't know who's doing better. Mm-hmm. And I say, are you willing to risk it? Because this could go on for another year. Mm-hmm. To some level, for all of 2021, we're going to have some levels of social distancing.
I agree.
Are you willing to come in second to your competitor who's maintaining and building relationships? And most people go, God, I never thought of it that way.
Yes.
And I'm like, 2 years of not being engaged could be ceding those relationships to your competition. So you have to do it. And it's not easy. It's hard to do these things by Zoom, by phone, by text. So a lot of people aren't doing anything. When I can get people to open up, they admit I'm not doing that much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because this is really related to your results driven as well. It all comes back to that, because what are you going to look at the outcome of, after this? And I agree with you. 2021, we were all just looking forward to it. Oh, it's going to be different. It's going to be, now it's like, okay, we're still stuck. It's just, okay, when is it really going to change? So I think it'll be hybrid for a long time. But when you're thinking about that results driven with those relationships, that has a better chance at the end of really paying off. And I totally agree with results. I mean, it's all those relationships with referrals. And I've worked a long time in the music business because of referrals, and that, you can audition and you can fake it. But boy, those referrals, when you're great too, it just keeps propelling you. So definitely.
From the music business, and I see it with my friends who are comedians and actors that I've had the pleasure to interview. You can
Right.
have two people who are equally as talented.
Definitely.
And the person who has the reputation and the connection, or
Right.
maybe the referral, it's usually the person who's going to get the job. All things being equal, you're going to choose the person you know, like, and trust. And if you don't know, like, or trust either of them, then you're going to take that referral from somebody else as the way to which one to choose.
It is so much that way because there's a lot of good people out there. In fact, a lot of great people who are not working. And because people don't really, or if they show up late. Now, I've worked for Disney for years too. You show up late, you're not hired again. Now, of course, they're not hiring anybody right now, but but it's that's just the way it is. And so that trust, building that, and the reliability, and just kind of going the extra mile. I think right now I'm going to get to some of your top tips that you're going to give, but I think even us as entrepreneurs, and I am a speaker as well as I've been an entertainer, but I've been in the gig economy for a very long time. I understand it. But in going that extra mile and doing something extra and to really nurture a relationship, I think it's great. So do you have, you have interviewed so many entrepreneurs through the years. And how many podcasts did you do, by the way? Have you counted?
So I was counting it up the other day. So I now host 4 shows. I have what's called Making Waves at Sea Level, which you said was Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. I've done over 635 interviews for that show. The Webinar Talk Show, which is a video program that Eliz Green and I started sort of for the meetings industry, but it was a way to showcase how good she and I are at being the MC and the interviewer. And it's a better way than having someone just talk for an hour.
Perfect.
You can do an interview. We've done 66 interviews, I think we counted up the other day.
Cool.
And then you tag on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast for 2 years. There's another 100. We just started Speakernomics, so there's 10 of those. But then I've done interviews in other formats. So I'm closing in on about 1,000 professional interviews.
Wow.
That I've been the host, and probably another 400 where I've been the guest.
Yeah. It's that's amazing how many, and you're just so good off the cuff. And we'll talk about that too with your improv skills in a moment. But okay, so what are some of those, since you've done so many interviews, what are some of those top tips that you have gained for your own business as an entrepreneur, even from listening? Are there some things that just really stood out besides relationships and all of that?
It's really interesting because I've interviewed people across industry lines, across generational lines, people from different cultures. And the number one thing it always does come back to is relationships. So I would say that, that is always sort of the final nail in that thing. But, one of the things that I've learned from several guests is the fact that you just have to get out and try. They say that so many people have so much talent and they never pursue it, or they never do it, or they have that voice in their head that talks them out of it. So I think it's a misquote, but it's a quote, I think, from Woody Allen. I think he said later, he never said it, but they said that 90% of success was just showing up. That comes up a lot from a lot of entrepreneurs. Is a lot of them are on their 3rd or 4th business when they succeed.
Yes.
They had several failures along the way. And instead of bowing their head down and burying it, they looked at the failures as a way to learn, and they brushed themselves up and they got up and they did it again. And really, that's what I did with my speaking business, right? I've been a professional speaker as my full-time job, until COVID hit, for 12 years. Yes. And it wasn't always all success. And it wasn't like a perfect line of more success year after year. Right. It was always the fact that you have to reinvent, you try new things, you tell a new story on stage and it doesn't work, or you have an audience who didn't think you were great. And then you have 12 audiences who say, wow, that was the best presentation I've ever seen. And then you don't stop there. You tweak it again and you try to make it better. So I think it's get in the game. It's my favorite quote is that Teddy Roosevelt quote about the man in the arena.
Oh, yes.
The person whose face is in the dirt, who's in there scrapping and scratching, not the critic who sits on the sidelines. Yes. That's my favorite quote, because I just want to be in the arena. I just want to be trying. And I'm not rich. I'm not uber successful, but I've had a really good run. And I've discovered, both through interviewing a lot of people, because it is like going to the best colleges in the world when you can interview 1,000 people.
Of course.
but I've really learned that too many people think they have to be perfect or on top or even happy. And I've found in my old age that you can be really contentment buys you a lot more than happiness, because happiness will come and go.
And what do they say? Done is better than perfect. And, we can wait forever. And I've done so many projects. I've done over two dozen albums, written musicals, done all that. They're done. And you have to push them out. There's a certain amount of risk in all of that. You don't know totally what's going to, sell or, but I love some of those quotes and the amount of work that you have to get in there and not be afraid of doing that. And and confidence is a big thing too. It's really one of the top things that hold people back. If there's a recent KPMG study on this confidence is the leading obstacle for people not taking risks, especially over the age of 40, which a lot of my audience is those at halftime, which is officially age 40 and above, and it comes quicker than we think, doesn't it? So
that's really interesting, because I have a motto that I decided 4 years ago. I was going to make age 50 to 75 the best years of my life.
And they are.
And I didn't even know what that meant. And some people criticized it for two reasons. My daughter, who was in her early 20s, said, well, what about 25 to 50? And my answer was, I was raising you. That was very hard.
Yes.
And I had a happy life. That's the other thing. I'm going to make it the best years of my life. It's not like I had a bad life. The first two sets of 25 years were pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But my dad lived to be 99. So some people said, well, Thom, what about age 75 to 100? Your dad was 99. I'm like, I will cross that bridge
when you come to it.
Yes. Yeah. So part of it at this age, and you're saying 40, I say, sort of 50.
Yes. Well, it comes
in this range, you have to make a conscious choice that you're going to make this the best years of your life.
It is definitely a conscious choice. And I love talking about this and really it's that age, the prime is about that 45-ish to 50, and there's a lot of women also that have been having children a little bit later. So, but you're hitting those years, but you have skills, you have experience, you have competency, all of that coming together. And because, and I feel it's one of the prime times where people are not using their skills, their resources, and their talents to the fullest, because either that confidence is holding them back, they're afraid to take risks, or they're afraid to go out of their house because of a virus or, something. So anyway, yeah. So those are, that is great. The relationships, I think we're coming back to that and not really you have to get over that of just being able to take a risk. And I'm a definite risk taker, but but you have to evaluate them very carefully too, because as an artist, I will tend to take risks that may not be profitable at the end. So, because I love to create. So there we go. So, well, I want to get to this multiple streams of income and kind of see what you had decided to do as well. But I really encourage this because for most any entrepreneur, and I get emails from artists all the time. I've been a Grammy voter, but there's been never a more important time than now. And they're just stuck. They're discouraged. Oh, I was doing so well on my touring and everything is stopped. I just got another one from an R&B artist, and he's just, he gets my weekly emails and just so excited, oh, these are really helping me right now. And I'm thinking, you've had a year. What are you doing? And so what are some of the more like no-brainer ideas for starting to implement this? Especially, I mean, you are a professional speaker, but you've been in sales, but you've got your programs. But how can people, besides just doing online seminars and all of those, but how can you develop that multiple, in your opinion, some of the no-brainers?
Sure. Well, I got to tell you, I was resistant to it, right? People would always say to me, Thom, you need to have another source of income. What if you get hurt, or what if, people no longer want to hire you or something like that? And I don't know, I'd been doing it at the time, like 10 years. I was like, I don't know, I'm pretty good at it. Associations and companies seem to like me. I just keep tweaking up the topic. I'll figure it out. And so people kept saying, well, what if that happens? And my answer was, it's not like there's going to be a global pandemic that shuts down the meetings industry.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I ended up being in a position where I needed to pivot fast, because all of my income in 2020 came to a halt in mid-March. I call March 13th the day my business died. And I want to tell you that story, but I just realized I have to plug my computer in or we're going to lose this.
Okay. Well, I will wait just a moment, but yeah, you probably have to keep it powered up if you've got, sometimes because I have Macs and I've worked on that platform for a long time. It depends on what computer I am on as well. So, but yeah, coming back to that, to where you have to, I love that phrase though, the day my music died. I mean, we could, I could sing a parody song about that right now.
So yeah, so March 13th, I call it the day my business died. And I watched,
Okay.
starting that day for the next couple of months, I watched everything sort of start to just go away.
Yeah.
And I did not have a plan. I didn't have a plan B. And contrary to what everybody thinks is, oh, you just pivot and do online speeches. Well, that hasn't been necessarily true for most of the speakers out there. There's not as much business. They're not paying as well.
Right.
So it just was a different world. So the first thing I did is I came up with a plan that I was going to talk to one smart person every day. And
Wow.
starting in late March, early April, I would schedule 15 to 20-minute coffees via Zoom with people who I admired. Some of them were speakers, some of them were meeting planners or working in associations. So some of them were in my industry and others were people in other industries. And part of it was a check-in. I'd ask them how they were doing, what was going on. And then I would say, the purpose for the call is I admire you and I'm looking for ideas. My business has been hit hard by what's happening. Do you have any ideas for me? Now, I'll be honest, most people had no ideas. Some people had really dumb ideas. Like I was like, that won't ever work. Some people had ideas I'd already heard of. However, over the course of about 6 months, about 6 people, maybe a few more, had ideas that I could put into practice. And so there were a couple of things that I did. One is when I started as a speaker, before I started getting on association stages and things like that, I had worked as the business development director for a law firm. And so I was doing training for lawyers on how to do business development. And I was doing individual coaching for young partners in law firms or senior associates in law firms who wanted to make partner on what were the basic sales skills needed to build a legal career. I knew because for 5 years, that's what I did, is I helped lawyers do that. So one person said, go back to your basics, Thom. And I just started reaching out to law firms and I offered a training program for networking and business development in the pandemic for professional services. And I didn't charge a lot for it, but I booked 10 or 12. So all of a sudden, every one of those paid for part of a mortgage payment or whatever. Good. And so I started stitching it together. And then I started doing individual coaching with some lawyers who said, hey, the pandemic, I got time on my hands. Yes. How can I set up a business plan? And so I started. So that was an idea that came from somebody on one of those calls who said, go back to how you started. What did you do 12 years ago?
That's such a great, I mean, we have a son who's an attorney and he's been working from his home office. He can get everybody on the phone now. So because everybody's been at home and they're going to stay that way probably till mid-year, I would think. So, yeah.
So another suggestion was I talked to a friend of mine who 5 years ago, I had been the keynote speaker at his company's international partner meeting. It was an executive search firm called Stanton Chase. It's one of the largest executive search firms in the country. And at the time, after I spoke for him, he said, why don't you come to work for us part-time doing business development? He goes, Thom, you speak in companies all over the country. You're meeting all kinds of people. You could make introductions for us and we would pay you a commission. And I wasn't interested because why? Why would I need another form of income? And so I got him on the call. And one of the things he said is maybe we revisit you coming to work in the executive search world. Yes. And so I joined in August, I joined Stanton Chase doing both business development and search. And it's a commission job, and it takes a long time, but it's the best company I've ever worked for. I'm working half-time for them. And, I've yet to do my first search in 5 months, but that being said, I've learned more about business. The company itself has the greatest executives I've ever worked with in any place I've ever worked. So supportive, so helpful. And it's actually helping me because some of the people that I do work for could also hire the company for that. So I'm merging my worlds, which is why I changed the name of my podcast from Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do to Making Waves at C-Level. Yes. Because we work with companies who want to place C-level executives. We don't help the person who's out of work. We work for the company to fill a specific bet the company position. And so I wanted my podcast to line up with both my speaking career and coaching career and my executive search career. So that's why I changed the name of that. So it was a lot of little things like that. And then a couple of associations have come along and they liked my podcast and they wanted to start one. And they said, could we find a way to make a deal for you to be our host? So I now have two. I have a company who just called me and we're negotiating right now for me to host their weekly podcast. And if I could stitch together 5 shows where, I'm the host of the show, they like my energy, they like my style. If it works, then all of a sudden I have a pretty good little stream. Again, it doesn't pay for everything, but if I had 3 to 5 podcasts that I was hosting, if I can place a couple of things in search and I can pick up a few speaking gigs, all of a sudden, I've made it through, this pandemic and I'm still earning money and paying the rent.
Yes. And you're not so underwater. So, it's hard when you're totally underwater to be able to tread enough to now get back up. So if you can, keep
Plus,
that going.
Momentum. It is easier to pivot when you're moving than if you're at a complete stop. And I've seen a lot of people just come to a complete stop.
Yeah.
And the world's going to be different in 2021, 22, and into 2023.
Right.
And if you're sitting back waiting for 2019 to come back, you're going to have a hard time to move forward.
Yes, definitely a hard time. So it's, and I think it's that momentum of, it's like a train. Once it stops, it takes a long time to get going. But if you just can have a little bit of that movement, it can accelerate, with that momentum. So really smart things to do. And we've all picked up extra little side jobs and as we're doing to kind of keep it going. I've been finishing some very large projects and taking the time to do that, scores that I haven't gotten out yet. So that you can sit back and say, okay, so what now? How can I create that revenue and maybe complete some of these things that need to be done? So that's a wonderful thing. And especially with podcasts, because when I had brought you in, when I was president of our chapter of National Speaking Association in LA, and you talked about podcasting and you don't want to start it until you can keep going. And my goodness, have you kept going? So.
And I'm going to be speaking next week for the National Speakers Association on monetizing your podcast. And it has nothing to do with advertising. I sell some ads on my podcasts that I do, but it's not that. I have, even before I picked up paid podcasting jobs, I actually was picking up speaking gigs from companies because someone listened to my show and their company would be like, oh, we need someone for the sales kickoff. And a person who was listening goes, hey, tells his boss, you should listen to this podcast. And the boss would call me and say, can you come speak to my team? And I wouldn't pick up a lot, but I'd pick up maybe 2, maybe 3 a year. Well, you start looking at that over 3 years. That's a solid amount of money.
Right. I love your honesty. And this is what I really loved about bringing you in too, because we got to know you a little bit, my husband and I, Greg and I. But you're not bragging about all these amazing things that you've done. I mean, you're down where the rubber meets the road. You're paying,
So I have a problem with people who I call in the self-appointed guru class.
Yes.
And these are the people who take a picture sitting on $100,000 car.
Yes.
Maybe they own it. Maybe they don't. That would be even worse. But you know what? I drive a 6-year-old Ford Mustang. And you know what? I like the Ford Mustang, but you're never going to see a picture of me sitting on the hood of, a car with 70,000 miles on it that's 6 years old and hasn't been washed since COVID came along. Well, that's not true. But, as part of my marketing, because I'm super honest, I tell people all the time that I left a corporate marketing job to become a professional speaker. And it took me a couple of years to get my income back. And then I've always made a little more than I probably would have as a corporate speaker. But, I don't need to pretend I make $1 million a year.
Right.
If I made $1 million a year, I'd tell you I make $1 million a year, but I don't. And there's no reason to pretend.
Right.
There's a lot of people who believe in this whole idea of fake it till you make it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The concept is okay because it's a mindset thing, right? The idea is act like you're successful before you're there, but it's interpreted as go out there and be a fraud until you make it. And that grosses me out.
Yes. There's a local city around us, as I always say, that, or a county that has been, they have a lot of the leased cars and they look wonderful on the outside, but then, when the commercial real estate market really dropped out some years ago, though everything was gone. It was all on paper. So yeah, I like living in reality where we are. So, and this kind of comes to the next question on how you describe your work ethic and what it takes to be an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur. Actually, you have just described some of it because of all the work that getting on the phone every day. And that's hard for especially some of us who are introverts. I'm an introvert and I'm an intentional extrovert. I'm good on a stage, but I can sit and do my little thing. So, but you describe yourself as a former couch potato. So I kind of want to go there in what kind of changed that mindset, because most don't realize the amount of work it takes to be an entrepreneur. It's some work.
Well, and I describe myself as a couch potato in regards to the fact that I took up running at 50. Part of make 50 to 75 the best years of your life is I had to lose 30 pounds. And I can compare being an entrepreneur to losing 30 pounds. The only way you're going to do it is to get off the couch and get out there and do something. Yes. In my case, it was running. There's a lot of choices you can make. So for me, it's, if you want to be an entrepreneur, or really, if you want to be successful in anything, and you weren't born with a trust fund, then you've got to go out and be scrappy. I had a nice life. I grew up in a nice middle-class home, but in the end, each kid wasn't left millions of dollars. We were left with the fact that we had great parents.
Yes.
But if I want to give my kids, the level of life and the chance to go to, really good colleges and things like that, I have to go out and be scrappy. And that's the word my dad always said was, go be scrappy. You'll figure it out. You're scrappy. And I don't think I ever embraced that word until the COVID came along. And I realized that, if I'm not scrappy, we're not going to keep the house. Yeah. And so it's been, that's been my word for 2020 and 2021 is get out there and be scrappy, which means I don't have to be the most successful professional speaker. I don't have to be the top executive search person. I don't have to be the best podcaster in the world. I just have to be doing those things.
Yes. Yes. Actually moving. There's that momentum again.
Yes.
Move
forward.
Yes. Moving forward.
And sometimes it is 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but that is way better than 1 step forward and 2 steps back.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, some have felt that this year. So, but there's times like that. So, and you've also stretched yourself. Now, this was in pre-COVID times, but to perform a lot of open mic nights and in comedy clubs and as a stand-up comedian. Now, there takes a lot of courage to do that. I've done a certain amount of comedy improv because I've done a lot of shows that are more scripted and I kind of wanted to be off the cuff. But what this would petrify most, I mean, just getting up and doing this.
It petrified me.
Yeah.
So as a kid, Deborah, I wanted to be a comedian or an actor. Like I was really involved in drama in high school and I did all that stuff. And that's what I wanted to do. But my parents weren't really supportive of that idea. They weren't anti, but they never really helped me clear the mountains out of the way. And I didn't know how to do it. I wasn't as scrappy. There wasn't the internet. So I didn't know how. I didn't have any role models in my life. And so I went to college, I got a corporate job, I got married, I had kids, but in the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to do that. Now, here's the worst part about being a kid who wants to be an actor, who never does, or a comedian who never even tries. I grew up in Los Angeles. I literally grew up 15 miles, 20 miles from Hollywood.
Right.
I could have found a way to try, and I never did. So a couple of years ago, I was going to be giving a speech in New York. And a friend of mine who was a professional comic and a professional speaker, I said, oh, I'd love to get together. And I told him when I was going to be there, he said, come to open mic night with me that night. Well, I love comedy clubs. I've been going since I used to go to the Ice House in Pasadena when I was a teenager, and I love it. And I was like, I've never been to an open mic night though. I'd love to see you work on new material. And Drew looked at me and said, that's not what I'm inviting you to do.
Wow.
And I was like, I reeled back like, oh no. And he goes, create a 5-minute set and get up at open mic night. And I said, there is no way. And if I was going to do it, I'm not doing it in a comedy club in New York City.
Yeah.
And he said, didn't you say you wanted to do this? And part of what I teach when I speak is I have this whole module on try new things. And he says, aren't you the guy who teaches try new things? And I was like, God, you hate it when people throw your own content back at you.
Of course it is horrible.
So in the next 2 weeks, I wrote a 5-minute set. I met Drew beforehand. He helped me tweak it, put in some better punchlines, and I got up and did it. And here's the thing. It was fine. I wasn't the worst of the night. In fact, some of the comedians came up to me and said, that was your first time? Like, that was really good. However, like Jerry Seinfeld, I'm sure isn't worried about job security because I did an open mic night. But I realized that it had pushed me out of my comfort zone. It was something most people would never do.
Right.
And so I came home to Austin and I told my wife, I'm going to do 100 open mic nights. And she was like, you already travel like 100 nights a year. What are you talking about? I go, I don't even know. But I figure if I do 100 open mic nights, I'll learn something. So I started doing it once a week. Often when I was on the road, I would just Google open mic night Los Angeles or open mic night Philadelphia. And I would find a comedy club or a coffee bar or a bar that had a comedy open mic night. I'd go, I'd sign up, I'd wait my turn, and I'd do a 3 to 5 minute set. And I wasn't great, but I got better. I got confident. But here's the weird thing. Over the 2 years, and I got to 95 open mic nights before COVID hit, I became more playful and more confident on the stage. And it's not that I wasn't confident before, but it was a new kind of confidence because I'm a pretty good speaker. If you bring me into a company, it's going to be good. You saw me speak for your club, your chapter.
Yes.
You know,
nice.
I do a good job. I've never bombed.
Yeah.
But in open mic nights, I've had absolute crickets. I've had a room look at me like, who brought their dad who's not funny and let him get on stage? So what happened is I realized that I could just have fun and be playful as a speaker, and it would be a more enjoyable thing for the audience. And I also learned in open mic nights, even if I wasn't funny, if I told a good story and it was energizing, people would still come up and go, that was really good. So I can learn to get funnier, but the playfulness and the confidence was something that I gained from those open mic night experiences. And now I just find things like I've never been, I'm scared of heights and I'd never been ziplining before. So I went ziplining. We were in Costa Rica for Christmas this year and we went whitewater rafting and it scared me, but I still did it. I still went. So I've learned over the last 4 years in this make 50 to 75, the best years of my life. I've learned part of it is just saying yes to things that scare me. And the stand-up comedy was probably the scariest and the most rewarding of a list of about 12 things that I have just said yes to that I never would have when I was younger.
Well, improv is the whole mantra is yes and so yes and and so yeah, that's great. And when you brought up the point about wanting to be an actor or comedian, what I have found in the area of the arts are that because I was in that area for so many years, it's actually a companion field. It's very similar to speaking, so it was an easy, it's an easy feel at least, but I wasn't trained as much in the business area. And that was the downfall, I think, of many musicians as well. But it's the same as speakers. Many speakers are still sitting at home wondering, oh, what do I do? When am I going to be on a stage again? And doing very limited things. But developing the business aspect. And that's what I love about NSA. And I just felt like, wow, this is so good for every area, especially for artists. But it was comedians, for musicians, for, improv, for all of that, that training. And I can understand when a parent is a little hesitant thinking, oh, how are they going to survive? They're going to live in their car the rest of, am I going to support this kid for the rest of their life? You want to have something, to where it would feel more solid. So it's great that you've been expanding on that and that it's really helped you out in your speaking business. How much fun is that? So, and I want you to describe now, because you've really expanded into the MC area, which is just a blast. So, or you're an opener. So you have stories are a big part of that, I know. But how has that, and what does it take to be in that position if there are speakers listening to this?
So there's a lot of speakers who call me and say, I've just been hired by a client to be the MC. And they didn't even want to do it, but the client offered them and there was more money involved. Yes. And I said, are you sure you know what you've gotten into? And they're like, oh, yeah. And then afterwards they call me and say, I will never do that again. So the thing about the difference between being a speaker and being an MC, there must be 10 differences if I was to really get into it. But one of the first ones is I talk to speakers all the time and they go, oh, I'm there to serve. It's not about me. I have no ego. I disagree. You don't become a professional speaker without a little bit of ego.
Yes.
And the best ones, the best speakers I know, yeah, they're not egomaniacs, but they like being on stage. They like that. So I know that the want to be an actor is fulfilled by being on stage. I know that that is a piece of it. Yes, I want to serve. Yes, I want to inspire, but you have to have that.
Right.
Being the MC, it is not about your ego. Being the MC is about pumping up the other. It's about making the other speaker the star and making the audience the star. So for some people, it's a hard pivot because they want to get up and tell their stories and be the star, because the keynoter is the star of the show for an hour, whether they admit it or not. You're the star of the show for an hour.
Right.
The MC has to set that person up. So it becomes a different type of thing. And the way I fell into this was I had a niche. I called myself the conference catalyst. So my speaking was about your network, your brand, how you engage with other humans. And halfway through the keynote, I would go, I have an idea. Let's use this conference. Let's use it as a human laboratory. And then I would give them tips on how to better engage, network, and maximize the event. And I had a meeting planner who came up to me and said, you transformed this meeting. You were the catalyst that made it better. And that's where I got the term, the conference catalyst.
Oh, cool.
She's all, I want you back next year, but I can't have the same keynote. We never would have the same keynote. What are we going to do? And I said, well, maybe I could be your MC. And I had a year to learn how to be an MC. I did not make one phone call and jump on stage.
Yeah.
I spent a year talking to everybody who had MC'd in every possible thing. And I learned tricks of it. And so then what I would do is I would do a hybrid. I would make them give me 10 minutes every morning to do a little speech. So I would get the speech part in where I'd give the content about connecting. But then I would pivot to introducing the speakers and setting up the rest of the day and things like that. But it took me a long time to learn. It wasn't just an easy pivot from speaker to MC because it's such a different thing. And for 12 months, I studied it before I ever did it. And it worked out great. And they had me back. I think I did 2 more years as their MC. And every year since then, I've MC'd somewhere between 5 and 8. You can't do as many MC gigs because for a 4-day conference, you have to be there 5 days. I had young children. If you go back 8, 9 years, I had kids at home. So you could only do a few MC gigs a year if you want to sleep in your own bed. Whereas a keynote, you can be gone one night, maybe 2 if you got a flight issue, but usually you're gone a night. In fact, if I keynote in Texas, I can fly out in the morning, keynote at lunch, and fly home before bed. So it's a different time investment. So I only do 5 or 8 a year. I'm very cautious about who I will MC for. But it's transferred very well into the virtual world because the need for an MC for a virtual conference is bigger than the need for a live conference because there's so much more needed to engage people. So I've been MCing gigs, not a lot, but several since COVID began. And you don't have that time commitment of being away from home for 5 days at a time.
Right. Oh, that's, it really is a different mindset because I've had to do both as well especially in music. We've had to, double dip and do that at certain places. So, but this is such great, some great principles. Again, it comes down to relationships and how you're doing follow-up and what you were able to do with your emceeing came out to, you were asked because you were available and you were willing to learn and you put in the work to learn. You don't just automatically think, oh, I can just do this. So
yeah, that's a mistake that a lot of people make. They think, well, how hard can it be?
Yes.
And it's like, well, if you're going to do it well, here's the thing about emceeing. You're the host of the event, which means most of the big events, you only work in the morning because that's when they have general session. But if you're a good MC, you stay for the coffee break, you're wandering around, you're shaking hands, you're talking to people, you're at lunch, you're walking around to some tables, checking on everybody. And then you're at the cocktail party at night. And if they have an offsite event, you go to it. And I tell people that if you had a dinner party at your house, you wouldn't invite everybody over and then go to bed.
Yes.
You're the host of the event. So you're at everything. And a great MC stays and is engaged in every aspect of the conference. And some people are like, that's just so much. And I'm like, well, that's why it's a little bit premium priced.
That's
but it doesn't pay, every day doesn't pay the same as a keynote. So, it's not a keynote fee every day for 4 days. So you got to know what you're getting into. And different clients have different expectations. So you have to have a lot of communication up front about what they expect you to do.
Right, right. Great words of advice. Thom, this has been such a pleasure. If you have one little ending word of advice for us, what would that be for those listeners today on the results, as we talk about result driven, opposing to just the project driven? So,
Well, I'm going to twist it up a little bit. It might be a dotted line to get to what you just asked, but my favorite quote that I always say that people ask me, or final words of advice, comes from my father. And my dad died 7 years ago. He was 99 when he died. He was 52 when I was born. So he had a lot more wisdom than he did when my brothers were growing up, because he was a lot younger of a dad for them. My dad always said, be slow to anger and fast to forgive. Yeah. And I have found in my career, if I'm slow to anger and I'm fast to forgive, things go a lot better than if I instantly think someone's trying to screw me over and if I hold a grudge. Yes. Now, there are times where anger is the appropriate answer, and there's times where you write somebody off because they're a real jerk.
Right.
But as it turns out, like, that's 1 time out of 100. 99 times you can anger slower and forgive faster, and you're going to be the one who wins for doing that.
Well, it's a mindset. And I always say the personal is connected to the professional. And, you're going to be a lot calmer and less stress, the whole thing. And with that slow and great words of advice. I had some great ones from my dad too. And it's I'm so thankful, just such a legacy. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. I know you're extremely busy. So it's really fun. I've not talked to you in a couple of years, I don't think. I've just seen you on some other things, and I try to follow some of the things that you're doing as well. And so thank you so, so much. So,
thank you, Deborah. This was great.
Yeah, it was really fun. So, and I want to remind everyone, next week, make sure you tune in when your why has been stolen and you're left without purpose. And purpose is very important for the direction that we're going, again, creating momentum and all of that. So, and I'm going to talk about what it feels like when your why has been stolen and you feel like you're just circling round and round, as I talk about circling round a roundabout. So, and that's one of my programs, that Roundabout Hero. How do you become that? So, womenathalftime.com. You can get here anytime. I encourage you to listen, subscribe, and even write a review. I love those. And so it's been so much fun to be here with everyone today. So thank you again for joining me, Thom. And I will look forward to being with everyone next time, and bye for now. Thank you for joining us on Women at Halftime. Visit goalsforyourlife.com or womenathalftime.com for many more resources, downloads, and programs, or to get in touch with me. I'd love it if you leave me a review and tell your friends. So until next time, this is Deborah Johnson signing off.